Hello, sweet friends, and happy Wednesday. It's been a while since I've created some neurographic art, and so this week I want to create something similar to neurographic art, but it won't be neurographic art exactly. I'll just borrow some of what I do in neurographic art and apply it to my painting. First things first, I am cutting my paper to 10 by 10 inches, and then I'll proceed to taping my paper to a rigid surface. In order to keep the tape as straight as possible on my paper, I like to give myself a little guide mark to follow. And I don't draw a whole entire line. I just really want something approximate. And usually that's enough to give my eyes a good way to focus on how to put my tape straight on the paper. I'll start my painting process by using my three favorite colors, or I think probably my three favorite bright colors. I'll be working with carmine nacre, nickel azo yellow, and I'm using this blue also that's on my palette, which is a bit of a mix of French ultramarine and turquoise, but it's not really going to be very evident, or it's not going to matter too much what the color of this blue is. But I'm adding basically a blue, a yellow, and a red, so primary colors in if you will, and I'm just applying them very liberally on my paper. To apply my paint, I'm using what's called a wet on wet paint technique, which simply means that I'm not letting the paint dry between applications. And by doing so, the paint will blend, the different colors of paint will blend together. And this is exactly what I want for the type of painting I want to create. I want to have sort of a blended effect, and it's important for me, if this is what I want to create, that I not let the colors dry in between applications. The final element I'll use to make my background is some fine-grained table salt. I'll sprinkle it all over the surface of my paint, and once I'm done applying it, I'm just going to simply let it dry and do its magic. It always amazes me what salt can do with watercolor. I find this so pretty, so I want to try and preserve as much of this as possible. And in order to do this, I am going to work in creating some circles on my background. I'm not going to make them touch entirely, but I want to create circles to cover the whole entire paper. My painting process today is meant to be very simple in order for it to be very mindful. I want to take out as much analytical thinking of out of the equation as possible. I want this to be one of those things where I am doing something so simple that I don't really have to think about it too much. Now that I'm finished adding my circles, I've pulled out my brush pen and I'm gonna start painting in between my circles. It's gonna be a bit of a long process, but I don't mind because that is the type of thing that's, again, very simple, that helps me just focus in on what I'm doing, that doesn't require a lot of thought, really. It just requires doing. And it's, to me, very meditative and very much like neurographic art. I love that part of the process where you're just kind of painting in between your lines, trying to smooth out harsh areas where the lines are connecting. And this, what I'm doing right now, is reminiscent of that for me. And I love how relaxing doing something like this, something very repetitive, can be very relaxing. It's often in my painting process when I'm in the process of doing something as simple as this that my next idea for my painting comes to mind. And it's all about making sure that I'm not in my critical voice. I'm just really focusing on what I'm doing. And my intuition usually kicks in those moments where everything is more quiet. And I get these little nudges for um, ideas on what I could potentially do next in my painting process. And that's where this idea came from. I was working on coloring the blank areas in between my circles, and I thought I want to add some more circles to the center of my circles. I've mentioned on a number of occasions I really love circles, and so I often include them in my paintings, and today's painting is really all circles or mostly circles. And I wanted to do this because I wanted it to be a very um, easy painting, and I wanted it to be bright and cheerful. The black in between my circles is really helping to make those colors in my background pop. And now I'm going to start to add some elements to make my circles more interesting. So now I'm going to come in with some magic green and I'm going to select some circles, inner circles, in which I'm going to basically trace the magic green over the pencil guides that I drew using my circle guide. I did that because it makes it way easier for me to create a circle that's not too wonky. Sometimes I don't mind the look of an organic circle, but when I'm creating something like this, or I'm trying not to think too much, I like to have little guidelines to help me focus in on what I'm doing. It also helps me to practice my fine motor skills and fine details using my micro mini brush. You'll notice that I've left many of the interior circles without color, and that was on purpose because as I was adding my magic green, I thought star gold would also really look nice in this painting. And so I want to do the same thing I did with the magic green. I'm coming in with my micro mini brush and I'm gently stroking the very tip of the brush across the lines, the guidelines that I've given myself using my circle guide, and this helps to create very fine lines. If by any chance I happen to make my lines a little thicker, I try not to worry about that. The whole purpose of this painting process is to relax and have some fun. Now I've pulled out my dotting pen and I'm going to start adding some stippling to the outer edges of my bigger circles. And it's going to be a bit of a long process, so I won't, of course, show you the whole thing on video. But I do want you to see what it is I'm doing and where it is I'm adding the stippling. But when you're working on your own painting, it's always good to let your intuition guide your process. So I've decided that this is where I want to add my stippling. If you wanted to add stippling, maybe your intuition would be guiding you to do it somewhere differently, or to do it differently, or to not add stippling at all. It's always important for us to listen to our inner guidance because that's how we can develop our own personal creative style. Now I've decided to use my extra fine tip black pen, and I'm going to add some vertical lines into different areas of my painting. I love to keep every single step of my process as simple as possible, especially when I'm doing something that for me is supposed to be relaxing. If I want to make my process relaxing, the last thing I want to do is do anything complicated. And so I'm once again going to add some more lines in my painting. I flipped it around because I wanted the lines to be a little bit different than the first lines I created. And I'm using my ruler to again give myself some guides to follow. So I'll keep my lines very organic, and that's why I prefer to draw most of my lines by hand. But using a guide with the ruler, drawing a line as a guide is really helpful because it will help me draw my lines as vertically as possible without making them so straight that they look like I used a ruler the whole way through. If you prefer to use a ruler, that's fine too. It's all about what our personal preferences are. And for me, my personal preference when it comes to creating vertical lines is to try and keep them as organic as possible because I do find that they look very pretty that way. as I'm working on adding these last few vertical lines, I'm feeling as though my painting is now complete. The best way for me to figure out if I'm really satisfied with the painting at this point is to remove my tape and see if I'm still feeling that way once the tape is removed. Looking at the painting without the messy edges gives me a better perspective on the painting, and yes, I feel it is finished. And I really love how it turned out. It's a very simple little painting, a simple little process. It took me a little bit of time, which is not a bad thing. It helps me to work on my patience, but it also allows for me to spend some really mindful moments just creating very peacefully. Are there any specific types of creative processes that you find more relaxing than others? I'd really love to hear about how you use creativity to help you relax. Thank you again for making the time to join me on my creative journey. I hope you have a wonderful week and happy creating!